from South Dakota.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to speak on the National Defense Authorization Act and an amendment that I have filed, Amendment number 2903, which supports the Next Generation Long-Range Strike Bomber. And I hope that we do get back on the defense bill. This amendment, like many of the amendments that have been filed to this bill, is both germane and non-controversial. Has been in the past practice with the Defense Authorization Bill, my amendment should be included in a manager's package that could be passed by unanimous consent. In the past, when the Senate has considered the National Defense Authorization Act, we've had an average of around 11 recorded votes. That's the historical average. And this year so far we've had 2. For amendments included by voice vote or unanimous consent, anywhere from 80 to 100 amendments tends to be the norm. In other words, that's the number of amendments that we process, not necessarily have recorded votes on, but amendments that are offered to the bill that are handled in one way or another but end up getting added to the legislation. For amendments, for this year I should say, we haven't even been able to have a manager's package which would include many of these non-controversial amendments. Now I support the Senator Inhofe, who was the ranking Republican on the Armed Services Committee, and my Republican colleagues here in the Senate in the approach that they've taken while this bill's been on the floor. Considering this bill, there needs to be an open amendment process. And we're not talking, as I said, about the hundreds of amendments that have been filed, but a reasonable number should be considered on the Senate floor. Everyone here is aware of the time constraints we're under, but that is not an excuse for bypassing an open amendment process on this important piece of legislation. Mr. President, as the Senate debates the annual defense authorization bill, our military continues to face increasing budget constraints. These budget constraints have forced our military to prioritize and to develop ways to increase efficiency and to reduce spending. As we look ahead, the Department of Defense must continue to focus on ways to best prepare for the threats our country will face in the future. On all fronts, these future threats will require an increasingly mobile force that relies on speed and technology to reach conflict points around the world. With regard to the Air Force, this means a modernization of our current fleet. According to General Welch, the Chief of Staff for the Air Force, the Next Generation Long-Range Strike Bomber is one of the top 3 procurement programs our Air Force must pursue to modernize our fleet and to meet future challenges. The other 2, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter and the KC-46 aerial refueling tanker, are currently underway. The Next Generation Bomber, which General Welch has called, and I quote, a must-have capability, will ensure our ability to operate effectively in anti-access and area denial environments. As potential adversaries continue to modernize their anti-aircraft systems, our ability to penetrate those systems must modernize as well. The Department of Defense has already begun investing, I should say, in the research and development phase for the Next Generation Bomber. In the meantime, our current bomber fleets of B-2s, B-1s, and B-52s continue to provide robust deterrent in long-range strike capabilities. The upgrades, which are currently being made to these aircraft, allow them to operate in the modern environment. However, as this fleet continues to age into the mid-2020s, the Next Generation Bomber will need to come online. My home state of South Dakota is home to the 28th Bomb Wing, which commands 2 of 3 combat squadrons operating the B-1B strategic bomber. The men and women of the 28th Bomb Wing have bravely defended our country in Iraq and Afghanistan. And in 2011, the B-1 played a key role in Operation Odyssey Dawn, launching from Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota, dropping munitions in Libya, and returning home in one continuous flying mission. This operation marked the first time the B-1 launched combat sorties from the continental United States to strike targets overseas, and it exemplifies the B-1's crucial flexibility and capability to project conventional air power on short notice anywhere in the world. Of the 3 aircraft in our bomber fleet, the B-1B has the highest payload, the fastest maximum speed, and operates at the lowest cost per flying hour. As I've said before, the B-1 is the workhorse of our United States Air Force. Mr. President, as the R&D continues for the Next Generation Bomber, the Air Force has already identified many essential capabilities to this aircraft. According to the Air Force, the Next Generation Bomber should be usable across the spectrum of conflict, from isolated strikes to prolonged campaigns. It should provide the Commander-in-Chief the option to strike a target at any point on the globe. and it must be able to penetrate modern air defenses despite an adversary's anti-aircraft systems. In terms of payload, it must be capable of carrying a wide mix of standoff and direct attack munitions and have the option for either nuclear or conventional capability. As part of the strategy for development, the next generation bomber should allow for the integration of mature technologies and existing systems, taking into account the capabilities of other weapon systems to reduce program complexity. While developing the next generation bomber will not be easy, the Air Force has learned several important lessons from its most recent procurement efforts. The Department of Defense has already streamlined requirements and oversight to ensure a timely decision-making process for the next generation bomber. This initiative has included efforts to reduce costs for the overall program with the goal of preventing cost overruns which have plagued previous acquisition programs. The Department of Defense already knows the importance of this program, Mr. President, and as outlined in the 2015 to 2019 Program Objective Memorandum, the Air Force intends to prioritize the development and acquisition of the long-range strike bomber over the next several years. As the Air Force continues to modernize, the long-range strike bomber remains a must-have capability for future combat operations. So this amendment, Mr. President, is very straightforward. I hope that we get back on the defense authorization bill. I hope we have an open amendment process. I hope that amendments like this, which are germane and non-controversial, can be included in a manager's package of amendments or at least considered on the floor by my colleagues in the United States Senate. It is essential, Mr. President, in light of the many challenges that we faced around the globe today, the potential adversaries that are out there, the threats that exist as we look out over the horizon, that we make every preparation, take every necessary step to ensure that our country can defend ourselves and our allies around the world. American interests, American national security interests are always at stake, and it is important for us to be investing wisely in those types of weapon capabilities that can ensure that the United States is prepared for whatever contingency might develop around the world. And so I hope that we will get back on the defense authorization bill, allow amendments to be considered, as they have been in the past. Whenever we've processed defense bills in the past, Mr. President, we've had a process that has allowed for consideration of many amendments, as I said before, 80 to 100 in most cases, and multiple roll call votes, way more than we've had on this bill so far. But it is important to the men and women who wear the uniform of the United States military that this be a priority for us. It should be a priority for our country, and I hope that we can get the bill on the floor, process amendments, pass it, and get it on the President's desk where it can be signed into law. Mr. President, I yield the floor.